Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join His mission. This podcast is powered by Within Reach Global. Subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube today. Visit missionspulse.com.
Welcome to Missions Pulse, Dr. Todd Johnson. I'm so excited that you're here and excited for our conversation that we're going to have here.
Yes, so we're excited to be here as well, here in Chiang Mai, where we've lived on two occasions on sabbatical and partnered with Create International, which is based here, a longtime friendship with Calvin and Carol Conkey, who we've known for over 40 years.
Wow.
So we're really excited to be here again.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to have you on. When you drop a number like 40 years, we're talking about a legacy in missions. I think specifically when you're talking about or addressing missionary attrition, man, people don't hang around that long these days.
That's right.
2 years, year and a half, first term. And why don't we just key off of that right now? What has kind of kept you in the missions world for so long?
Well, I had two mentors in the more distant past, both who've led me in the direction of the research that I'm doing now. One was my father-in-law, Ralph Winter,
Yes,
who really encouraged me not only to read and study, but to produce research that other people could use. And I got so interested in Ralph Winter that I married his youngest daughter, Tricia. So,
right.
and I had moved from Minnesota, where I grew up, to Southern California, and really found myself there.
At the U.S. Center for World Mission?
At the U.S. Center for World Mission back in 1978.
Okay.
I actually joined Youth with a Mission.
Did you? All right.
At the time, but I lived on the campus.
So during the time that you were moving there to U.S. Center for World Missions, I was being born.
Oh, well, good for you.
Yeah, we're just kind of dating each other
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
Dating ourselves.
Yeah. So Ralph Winter was my first mentor and father-in-law.
Yeah.
And my second mentor was David Barrett, who I met a little bit later. I was actually living in Singapore when I encountered him, and he is the one who started the work that I'm doing now over 50 years ago. And so there are two legacy projects there, one in California and one in Nairobi, Kenya, that have really shaped my own life. And so in one sense, what I'm doing is new. I'm the younger person, 30 years younger than both of those men. And both of those men have passed away in the last 10 years or so.
That's right, yeah.
So it's very meaningful to be involved in this kind of work.
Well, I think it's so meaningful also when you talk about missionary mentors. This is something that I think this is not a fly by the seat of your pants Lone Ranger operation anymore. We've seen that in the past, I think. But having a mentor in missions, I like how Dr. Ralph Winter encouraged you not only to read, but to also create. What did he encourage you to read?
Well, we started out really in missions history.
Okay.
Even before I was back in university and working in graduate work and all of that, I was already studying the student volunteer movement in particular. So I had a lot of reading and collecting of books and other things that I did in that early period, looking at missions history. Yeah. Which was kind of interesting because later on, as part of my journey, I moved to Gordon-Conwell, where I am now. And Gordon-Conwell is actually very close physically to where the missions movement in the United States really took off.
That's right.
Adoniram Judson and that sort of a thing. And I was actually part of a group that celebrated the 200th anniversary of the missionaries who sailed from Salem, which is only 10 miles from my house. So I read all of this material in Southern California.
Okay.
And then later I had a chance to be part of these commemorations on the other side of the country. And that was really special.
I would think that would be so special because when you're talking about missions, present-day missions, the motto of this podcast, know God's heart, join His mission. Without that backdrop or the lens of history, it could be difficult to find and navigate your way. You don't know what's taken place in the past or who's gone before you to pave those pathways. I think that would be some sort of great inspiration to thrust you forth for decades.
That's right. And I suppose the unique thing about what I do is that I've taken the study of history, and I surprisingly was able to add quantitative analysis to it. And there's a field of study called cliometrics, which is what my degree is in, which is the quantitative study of history. And so, in relation to Christianity, we say ecclesiastical cliometrics, which is a mouthful, but it basically just means just looking at some of the quantitative data related to Christianity and mission. And that's been great because I love math since I was a little kid. I even tutored other children in the 6th grade because I was the one who just loved math so much.
You were in the 6th grade, or you were?
I was in the 6th grade and they were in the 6th grade.
I see, okay,
yeah,
your peers.
But the point being that I really thought I was going to have to leave math behind when I began, working in the missions world. And my father-in-law and my mentor, David Barrett, both encouraged me to do quantitative work.
I really like
and that's really what's been exciting for me because I still love math and I love missions.
Yeah,
so I'm able
to
do both of those. Yeah.
I think you're touching on, my mind's kind of going off on a number of different directions because I think people often think they need to leave behind their particular giftings or inclinations to join the mission field, where in fact I think God uses us in a particular role to enhance the things he's already gifted us with. You, in your case, math or quantitative. I also like how you're talking about missions or Christianity or global trends of Christianity in relation to quantitative data, because I think we have a tendency, many in general, to be very emotional in our response, but not understanding the data. And now you've just finished, by the way, the 3rd edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia. I think we're going to be talking about that more.
Right.
I imagine there's some quantitative data in that big book.
Yeah, well, and it's really, again, it's not just this book, it's the previous 2 editions that have had a big impact on the study of mission and tracking what's happening around the world. Because this project that I'm involved in has been going for 55 years this next year.
Started
in March of 1965 in Nairobi, Kenya, with David Barrett, and it's been continuously in operation since then. And we're really happy about that and continue to produce research related to Christianity around the world. So, and this encyclopedia is just the latest in our projects. Although they're 3rd edition, there's only 3 of them because you can only produce them once every 20 years or so. The first one took 14 years. Barrett started in 1968 and published it about 1981 or so. And then I joined him for the 2nd edition.
I see.
And worked on that with him in Richmond, Virginia, where we were based. And now we've just finished the 3rd edition. So
okay, well, you're talking about a big encyclopedia that I think many are familiar with. For those who aren't familiar, tell me a little bit about the World Christian Encyclopedia. I know you have a printout here. It's a big book. It's not a little flimsy paperback, I think. And
right.
That's
no.
It takes so long.
It's a huge book. It's 1,000 pages,
okay.
And even that we had to shorten. What we really wanted to put in there. Because there's 234 countries in the world, and it describes when Christianity came to each of those countries and what has happened since then. And of course, a country like Turkey goes all the way back to the New Testament period, so it's a long history. And what makes this interesting and sometimes exciting and sometimes sad is a country like Turkey, because our book takes most seriously the period 1900 to the present, plus projections to 2050.
I see. Okay.
But you look at Turkey, for example, and if you know your history in relation to Turkey, 1900 is a pretty important year. Turkey was 25% Christian in 1900.
Wow, okay.
Because the Greek and the Armenian church was there. And of course, we have the horrific genocide of just after 1900 of the Armenian community in Turkey. And the Greeks are pushed out, the Assyrians are pushed out. Turkey is 0.3% Christian today.
Really?
So, a lot of what we study is the growth of Christianity around the world. And we have countries that were, less than 1% Christian back in 1900 that are 90% Christian today, like in Central Africa or Papua New Guinea, a few other places. But we also have countries that had more Christians and now have less.
Yes.
So it isn't a one story. It's 234 stories at least, and that's why a book requires 1,000 pages. You're talking about just a few pages on each country of the world.
Yes.
And one of the unique things, of course, is studying every single country, because most books, of course, study one place or a few places, and this is what makes it an encyclopedia, is we're trying to cover every single country in the world.
I can only imagine the effort that goes into that. I mean, I just wrote The Mind of a Missionary last year, and let's go Papua New Guinea, Don Richardson and what took place among the Sawi tribe, and Peace Child, his book that was very popular. And I think it's safe to say that what you're looking at is, rather than growth of Christianity, which it is, obviously, is trends of Christianity, whether it be scaling up or down. Let me ask you this. After researching so much, looking at the world as a whole, specifically 1900 to present, and then projection 2050 and beyond, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the present state of Christianity and the direction that we're heading, knowing that God is in control, knowing that Revelation 7:9, let's say, is the culmination of the story, every nation, tongue, tribe, people before the throne, but in present day, present tense, optimistic or pessimistic?
Oh no, very, very optimistic.
Okay.
Yeah, because the big change. If we look at the table showing what percent of the world was Christian in 1900 and what percent is today, it's almost identical. Almost identical. So you'd say there's about a third of the world's population. So you'd say, well, nothing has happened in 120 years. But that's completely wrong, because
taking into
Christianity has shifted
Yes.
from north to south, so that there are more Christians in the global south now than there were in the north.
Yes.
81% of Christians in 1900 were Europeans. And now that's down to about 35%, from 80% to 35%. So, and the reason that's so exciting is because Christianity was never meant to be in one place in the world, like in Europe, North America. That's if you know your missiology, or your even just the biblical basis for mission, you understand that Christianity is meant to be spread across the whole world.
That's right.
So it's an aberration to have one place that most Christians live. So that's what makes me optimistic, is that Christianity has spread so much around the world. And that means that there's been a decline of Christianity in the global north. So a lot of places in Europe are much less Christian than they used to be, but Christianity is now much more diverse. It's all around the world.
Yes. So
it's a very exciting time, actually, to be a Christian, part of this global Christian community, and it's only continuing in that direction. So we're pretty excited about documenting this. That's really what we do. We're not, of course, causing it. We're actually just watching it and trying to document it.
I love when you're talking about that, you're obviously talking about these former mission fields now becoming a missions force. I think the complexion of missions that most people have in their mind, first of all, you say the word missionary, it brings up a lot of negative stigmas, I think. You have the pith helmet, guy in the pot, cannibals rocking around. But there's a different complexion of missions now. Previous mission fields, now the missionary force. Take, for example, Mongolia, Brazil, China. I spent 15 years in China. I mean, the rise of Christianity in that country, despite and perhaps in reason, cause of persecution. Where does this leave the Western Christian? Where does this leave the person who is living in, maybe some would consider, the post-Christian society? They don't want to be left behind in the statistics that, all this rise in Kenya or throughout Africa is taking place. It's exciting. I want to be a part of that. But they live and reside in North America. How do they play a part in this epic venture?
Well, it's important to realize that we're all part of this global Christian family, all of us. And so we all have responsibilities for what Christianity means to the whole world. So no one is going to stop being a part of it. It's just that we're going to be partnering more with people from all over the world. And I was here 40 years ago in Thailand.
Were you?
And I had a transforming event in my own life that's directly related to this. And that was that I was on a team of 8 people out in the border with Cambodia here.
Okay.
And I was the only American on the team. I mean, it was Malaysians and Filipinos, South Africans, Swiss people. I don't know. We were just a sort of a United Nations of Christianity team. And that was 1979, 1980.
Which is unique.
Yeah, it was.
Time.
And when we witnessed to the Cambodians who were in the camp that I was working in, after a while, they finally said to me, "Who are you people?" I mean, because everyone else was there representing a national interest of some kind, and here was this group of people with nothing in common nationally, let's say, even languages. We spoke several languages between us, and I've never forgotten that, because I thought that's really the ideal way for someone to encounter the gospel. Amen. It's a global message. It's not tied to any particular group. And this is especially important now because nationalism is taking hold all around the world. And Christianity is allergic to nationalism. It's a global faith, and it really can't be tied to any one people or country. And I experienced that personally, and it really transformed my life. And it actually propelled me into wanting to study this as a global phenomenon. So that's another reason I'm really excited about where we're going.
Yes.
It's not so much the decline of Christianity in the West, it's the rise of Christianity in other places. And that doesn't make you less of a Christian if you're a Western Christian. It makes you part of a broader family, which is a more exciting and more biblical experience. So that's why I think it's a positive development.
Absolutely. I like how your fair assessment in that people won't be left in the dust, as the words that I use, probably negatively, but rather part of a broader picture. I'm always so amazed when I always refer back to Revelation 7:9. It seems to me one of the culminations of this story. God is so intrinsically interested in culture, in race, in language. He is a God of the ethnos. And you look at, Jesus' last commands to his disciples, Acts 1:8, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem. And many pause there and end up in ethnocentric, myopic kind of perspective. It's like we say in Chinese, the frog at the bottom of the well, Jingdi Zhuo, who's looking up at that circle, that blue dot in the horizon. That's his only horizon. So myopic in their perspective. But when in fact Jesus says, I'll send you from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and even farther than you can imagine, to the uttermost parts of the world. Tell me about some of the things you just recently found, and I think this is a statistics that's been similar, stayed along the same lines for some time. 86 or 87% of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists don't know a Christian.
That's right.
Is this a cause of ethnocentrism? Why is that?
Well, no, I think it's broader than that, and it's partly the weakness of Christendom. If you think of Christendom as a place, where there's a lot of Christians, where there's connections, political connections between the church and the state. If you think about Europe, and especially medieval Europe, that whole way of looking at the world does not really make you a good communicator to people in other religious communities.
Yes.
It's a weakness of Christendom. The more Christians are set apart from everybody else, the less good they are at interacting with people. I'm
sorry to pause you right there, but doesn't Jesus say, you are in the world but not of it? But you're talking about this sending back into the world, it seems to me.
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's healthy. So I told you earlier that a third of the world's population is Christian. The ideal situation for Christians would be for the entire world to be a third Christian. In other words, Thailand, a third Christian.
I see.
And Botswana, a third Christian. And Brazil, a third Christian. Rather than having Christians concentrated, if they were diffused throughout the whole world, then I don't think we'd have this problem. We'd have much more healthy contact with people in other religions. But because it was almost sealed off, hermetically sealed off from the rest of the world, we're still geting over that, I think.
Yeah.
We're still getting over it. And here's an example from just the last few years of my own experience. Trish and I were in Singapore a few years ago, and I opened the newspaper. We used to live there. We've lived there on a couple of occasions, and I love their newspaper. I opened the newspaper, and it said 9 out of 10 Singaporeans are comfortable living and working with people of other ethnicities or other religions.
Okay.
And in
That's a high percentage.
Singapore is the most diverse country in the world.
All
There's
right.
no religion or ethnicity that's more than 30%. And that's unusual. That's not
Yes,
true hardly
yeah.
anywhere. And I thought, isn't that neat? Now, they've really worked on it because they had riots back in the 1960s, and the government was, wanting to do everything they could to build harmony and peace and all of that. So that's quite an achievement, and we saw some of that in living in Singapore. But at the same time, I had just read research in the United States that basically said 1 out of 10 Americans are comfortable living and working with other people.
Wow, completely opposite
It's
statistic.
the opposite of it.
Yes.
So there's not the skill in the United States. There's not the skill in this interreligious relationship
Yeah.
that there is in Singapore. Now, here's the irony, and this is maybe one of the big things that we've discovered. Of course, a lot of the resources, if you're talking about books and training, come out of the United States.
Yes.
So people that do not have an intuitive sense of how to work with people in other religions are writing all the books telling people in Singapore how to do it the right way. And that's backwards.
That's a
So when I
strange
was in
juxtaposition,
Singapore,
for sure.
I said, you need to write the books. We need to read
Yes.
your books because you have the intuitive sense of what it's like to live in community with people in other religions. That, I think, is the biggest change that's needed because we have the demographic change of Christianity to the south,
Yes.
but we still have the north telling everybody what to do.
Yes.
And once that changes, I think that statistic about Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims not knowing Christians personally, that'll turn upside down.
Yes.
But you shouldn't have people that are the least comfortable. I mean, in where I'm from, there's just this last week, there's anti-Semitic attacks in New York. There's
Yes.
Islamophobia. There's people telling Muslims they don't belong there, and they turn out to be Sikhs instead.
Yeah.
People don't know anything about
Yes.
religion in the United States. I mean, some people do, but most it's not part and parcel of what it means to be a Christian there. So that group of people who have the most money should not be telling everybody else what to do. It needs to turn the other way around, especially Asia. Asia's the place where people are in contact with each other across religions more than any other place.
Yes.
I think that's Asian Christianity's great gift to the rest of the world, is how to navigate this. I think that,
Yes.
to me, is part of what I see in part of my research.
I covet that time when you see resources coming from this part of the world and others, the global south, explaining how to go about mission, how to contextualize, how to bring the gospel in a relevant way. You think of Thailand here, even many Western believers would come and start out with what we know. We hold them up at the football games, John 3:16,
Right.
for God so loved the world, and we all know it. However, in the Thai Buddhist context, they do not hear what you are trying to explain. They don't
right.
hear that God so loved the world for that he gave his only begotten son. Who wants eternal life? They're stuck in the wheel of suffering forever. They want an escape, nirvana. So there's this way of presenting that I think, let's say Thailand or the Chinese or Singaporeans know how to be sensitive to the listener and thus present the gospel in a relevant and powerful, poignant way that they can then receive. I've recently had guests on from Kenya, from Ethiopia, David Lim from the Philippines. Dr. David Lim, said, this is the first time I've ever had an interview online. It's the first interview that is on YouTube. I'm struck by that irony because he, to me, has been a voice in the missions community and missions world. I'm married into the Philippines. My wife is Filipina for decades. Mm-hmm. And yet, you're right that these resources are coming from those who are least capable, and you were very graceful in the way you presented it, able to communicate the gospel to those who are different from them.
That's right.
So what is this? How is someone who is naturally inclined for comfort and security step beyond the boundaries of culture, of language, of that sphere of influence that they're already used to and accustomed to?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two fairly straightforward things that need to happen really for everybody, because everybody needs everyone else, in a sense.
And I like how you keep pointing back to the bigger body of Christ.
Yeah, that's right. And I think Christians today, no matter where you are, but maybe especially if you're in the Western world, should get to know Christians from the rest of the world. And of course, this is the age of migration when people are moving around. So it is not hard to get to know people from other places around the world. And I think that's a task in itself. We need to just see a lot more cross-pollination of Christians, because that has an impact on you. It's that little team I was with. I was the only American. That had a big impact on me. That can be repeated over and over again all around the world. So that's one thing. That's within Christianity. Then outside of Christianity, I think the same kind of connections need to be made. And I have one interesting thing for me is that when I came to Thailand in 1979, I came from Minnesota through California. I'd never met a Buddhist, never met a Thai person till I landed in the old airport in Bangkok, which is what was there. And that's when I first began to understand who Buddhists were, who Thai people were. Well, the interesting thing is when I go back to visit my mother, who's still in the same house I grew up in Minneapolis, if I go to my old bedroom and I look out the window, there's a Thai person living right next to my mom.
That's globalization at its
that's
best
right
there.
So I went all the way to the other side of the world to meet a Thai person. Now there's a Thai person living right next door. Now, a lot of Christians would say, we don't want Thai people. We don't want Muslims. We don't want any of these people living in our country. Even mission-minded people are acting like this these days. That's craziness. Because the whole thing is contact, and especially positive contact between Christians and non-Christians. This is a tremendous opportunity, not to target individuals, but actually to get to know people personally and then be a witness. That's what it's all about.
To put a face of a friend to the word Muslim. To put a face of a friend to the word Buddhist, rather than this mass conglomerate of individuals or people who are not quite individual because they're not personal yet to you.
That's right.
You're describing a world in which we live. I think many people make the large mistake of mistaking big K kingdom, the kingdom of God, with small K kingdoms. I remember one of my first times ever after 2 or 3 years living in China, going back to America, Prescott, Arizona, where I'm from, walking to the local Christian bookstore on Gurley Street and walking in, seeing a painting of Jesus on the cross, and in the painting was painted in the American flag draped over his shoulder.
Right.
It was startling to me because I had experienced a global version of Christendom or Christianity that was not so nationalistic. And then you think of the words, what I'm saying is I think you're bringing a challenge to those who are elevating nationalism above the kingdom of God. Is that what's taking place? I mean, I'm on Twitter. I see that happening a lot.
No, I think the antidote to Christian nationalism is global Christianity. Once you encounter Christianity from all over the world, all the different languages, and how about art as well? I mean, we collect pictures of Jesus or paintings of Jesus from all over the world. We're in our center. And I've often thought this is a really good way to think more clearly about Jesus. And one of my favorite is an Aboriginal artwork, which if you know Aboriginal art, has little lines in it, little
sketch
lines and that kind of a thing. And I found out from a friend in Australia that this Aboriginal art with Jesus, it's highly stylized. It's not a face, it's more of a style. And there's little lines on the cross, and they represent all the peoples of the world.
Wow.
And I thought, if you're from an Aboriginal perspective, if you can see the global nature of Christianity, that's pretty spectacular.
The world is my village.
Yeah, and I think that's the antidote.
Yes.
That's the antidote, because then you realize that the agendas that underlie Christian nationalism do not support global Christianity. And that's an important thing. There's so many important issues in global Christianity that are not found in each individual country.
Yes.
They may be important in those countries, but they don't represent what is needed for for the whole world. And I used to hear this when I would go to Washington, D.C. to make presentations to the government and that sort of a thing. I always hear this phrase which bothered me, and the phrase was American interests in the Middle East.
Okay.
And I thought, well, okay, there are American interests in the Middle East, but they're not my primary concern. My primary concern is Christian and human interests in the Middle East. So if you take oil and all of that and you put it on top of it, it gets complicated. That American interests in the Middle East might be at least partly responsible for emptying the Middle East of Christianity, for example.
Wow.
So as a Christian, I'm more concerned with the global Christian agenda than I am with any American agenda. That's what I'm saying. It takes you a bit further if you accept that.
Yes, I appreciate you. And you're very graceful in pointing this out. I think the polarization of what's taking place between nationalism and Christianity are very stark and very poignant right now. Go back to the popular phrase by John Piper. These are our options: go, send, or disobey. I think right now you could add to that, become a greeter, or one who greets, or one who welcomes the foreigner who is now in your neighborhood in Minneapolis. Whereas 40 years ago, you would not typically see Chinese or Buddhist or Thai people in your neighborhood. If you ever go to California, whole landscapes have transformed by those who have entered America. I'm talking about specifically. Is it time then to start taking baby steps, that is, in crossing cultures, to go and eat at your local restaurants, eat some pho in your local Vietnamese restaurant? Or how do you, I guess what I'm getting at is you're giving me this 50,000-foot view, nationalism and Christianity, but how do mindsets change? How do these paradigms shift? Because if you're driven by fear of a particular word, Islam, or other, Buddhist, confusion or surrounding that word, what are the baby steps? How do you actually get rubber on the ground, down from the 50,000-foot view of what's taking place into my life right here and now? Someone is interested in being part of the kingdom of God, advancement in the world, but they need baby steps.
Yeah, and I think there's two things you can do. Like in one sense, there's just one thing, and that is to get to know people personally.
It sounds too simple.
Yeah, there's no substitute for that. But there is one other thing, and that is to study, what other people actually believe, and that sort of a thing.
Yes.
And one interesting thing along these lines, and this is something Tricia and I have been involved in our own church, is to do courses on religion and other things, because we found out that a study was done 10 years after September 11th.
Okay.
And it showed that Christians, or Americans in general, but Christians, knew less about Islam 10 years after September 11th than they did before.
How is that possible?
Yeah, you'd say, how is it possible? And the reason it's possible is the huge amount of disinformation that's out there about Muslims in particular, especially tying Islam too closely with terrorism and not making distinguishing between that agenda and really what's happening in most of the Muslim world,
which in many cases is very nominal.
That's right.
I recently had Mr. Greg Livingstone, founder of Frontiers, on the show, and he's talking about this nominalism that pervades the Islamic world. That is not what we hear. We hear radical, and not nominalism.
Yeah. So I think you should invest in getting to know something about other people's worldviews, including religion. Yeah. And so we've really invested in that ourselves in Sunday school and other ways to help people to better understand. And we also did this last year we did a 16-week Sunday school class on welcoming refugees.
Wow. Okay.
Because again, if to get the proper information out there about what is actually happening and how it relates to the Christian faith, that's important. So it isn't merely getting to know people, because I met a guy who was doing ministry to Muslims in one part of the United States, and he said, I actually don't like these people very much, and they have no business being in my country, but I grudgingly go and try to do something.
Yeah.
So you could credit him. I credited him for actually doing something.
Sure, the gospel is going forward.
But I thought, what
regardless.
a poor foundation from which to build on, and people surely can tell
Yes.
that you don't like them. I mean, that's not a good way to do. So you need both the personal relationship, and the information.
I see.
You've got to get accurate information
Yes.
that you can then build on. And there's so much disinformation that it's, I think, very difficult, to get past that.
Yes. Get off Twitter, everyone, if that's, I think, what you're trying to say. I think that it's a great place to pause and say, you want a practical step, why not take Perspectives on the World Christian Movement? Perspectives.org is a transformative course. If there's not those courses that you're putting on, well, you know how to present a course, right? You've had experience crossing these different religious demographics, but many people don't have access to those kind of options. I think Perspectives on the World Christian Movement is a great resource, which also kind of leads me back to the World Christian Encyclopedia. 3rd edition, you're talking about 55 years ago it began, I think you said,
That's right?
When is that coming out? How do people access that? How do they fill themselves with credible information rather than this disinformation you're alluding to?
Right. Well, it's a large reference book made for research libraries and that sort of thing. That's the first thing I can say.
Okay.
But we're excited with this particular edition that there are electronic versions of it. So there you can buy the whole thing in PDF form or in ebook form.
I see.
And that's nice for people serious people like you.
Well, I would do that
to
because
download. But we actually have two other things.
Okay.
We have a full color 32-page global overview at the beginning of the book, and you can actually download just that.
I see.
So it's this full color overview is followed by 900 pages of country information.
I see,
Afghanistan, Albania, all the way to Zimbabwe. Okay?
Got it. Okay.
So that's the bulk of the book is actually country by country. But we did try to say, here's what global Christianity looks like, in the whole world.
Somewhat of a snapshot.
50,000 feet, as you said. So that's available by itself, which will be much less expensive, of course, than this giant book.
Yeah.
But the other thing that the publisher is also, this is Edinburgh University Press. The other thing the publisher has enabled this time is you can actually purchase individual countries.
Oh, wow.
So, or even regions. You could purchase Nigeria if you were sending a team there. And we have the whole history of Christianity in Nigeria, all the demographics, maps, charts, all that kind of stuff. You could just download Nigeria, or you could download West Africa,
And
which is another set of countries.
The Horn of Africa.
That's
or something.
right, yeah.
So where do people go to find this?
I think Edinburgh University Press.
Yes. Okay. I think you would just search World Christian.
Yeah, World Christian Encyclopedia, Edinburgh University Press.
Got it.
You probably get a quick hit.
Yeah, Google
there,
will
and
do
then
its
it'll
best.
show you. Yeah, that's right. Show you where to get these individual pieces if you'd like. But we're really not publishing for the average person. Our materials being cited not just by mission agencies and churches, but by the secular press and scholars in religion that are using it and that kind of a thing. So we're really trying to convince a very large group of people about what's happening in Christianity around the world.
Well, I like that you point that out, not that it's a negative aspect, that you're kind of challenging the trend of the currents of culture. And I think, it might have been a decade ago or so, that Time magazine actually highlighted the World Christian Encyclopedia as a very noteworthy
That's right.
piece done that's a standard within Christendom and a well-rounded picture, I think, right?
Right.
You think that's going to happen again? Time magazine going to pick it up?
Well, I don't know about Time, but no, we're in touch with major media outlets pretty constantly, and we want to continue to do that.
Okay.
So that we feel is important, again, to get accurate information about what's happening around the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of what's happening is counterintuitive as well. For example, one of our great findings, you might say, which is really over all these years we've been documenting it, is that the world is becoming more religious every single year.
I read that in something you sent me recently.
So that's counterintuitive, because
Yes.
you walk outside, you think, oh, that's, everybody's an atheist or whatever you're thinking.
The rise of the nuns.
Yeah, the
No
rise of the nuns. These are real things in
Sure,
the
okay.
Western world. But remember, most people live in China, in India, and they live in places where religion is on the move and growing.
Or at least where the spiritual world is very much in sync with the physical world.
Right.
It's not separated as we
and
do.
and
oftentimes.
even in Christianity, where's Christianity growing the fastest? Places like Africa, which is not all conversion anymore. It's large families.
I see.
So there's a demographic
Population
reality
growth.
to this too. That's why the world's becoming more religious every single day, and that's an important finding. And we feel that, and this has been supported by other people who do what we do, that's a trend we're going to see through 2050. So that's amazing to think the world is going to be more religious in 2050 than it is today, which takes us full circle back to the idea you should know something about religion and you should know
Yes.
people in other religions.
Yes.
That's an area that we all need to work on. That's, I think, one of the major implications of our research is this particular thing.
I think that is what this research, specifically World Christian Encyclopedia, is doing, challenging those things, encouraging people to understand those around them, that Jesus would still leave the 99 to save the one, and the one may look very different from you, may dress different, speak a different language. These are things that I think are going to really propel people to take part in God's epic mandate. I really appreciate you sharing not only what some might consider from a distance dry statistical data, right? This is not what this is at all. This is seeing what is taking place in the world, not because of humanity per se, but how God is orchestrating the end of the ages in such a magnificent way for the great return of his son. And I'm excited. I guess what I'm excited for is that people would have an opportunity to take part in the joy of this great commission, the sending forth of Jesus, not to kind of be so stuck in their nationalistic ways or myopic understanding or ethnocentric, ways, but to say, no, I want to see beyond what God is doing in this global landscape. I think this is what the research that you're doing specifically is encouraging believers from around the world to take part in, that joy of the journey.
That's right. Yeah, and one perhaps less obvious thing, or maybe it should say it's more obvious, is that by documenting where Christians are and where they are not, we're continuing to try to inform the missionary enterprise about where the best places to go are. And one of the toughest things that I think I've faced over the years is to see that the vast majority of missionaries, brand new missionaries, who are sent out around the world tend to go to Christian places.
Yes.
So we still have this particular problem, and it's part of it is one of our most quoted findings is that there are now 45,000 Christian denominations in the world, and so when you have that many denominations, then people in other denominations that you might not like or appreciate become targets for your missionary enterprise. And we continue to see this. And it's not all bad, actually. I mean, part of it is the fact that we do want more cross-pollination. So if you have a new missionary and they're invited to go to sub-Saharan Africa someplace, they get there, and it's a tremendous, and this could be a missionary from China or from Brazil or from Germany. It doesn't really matter anymore, of course. But it might be a very positive thing for that church to have this connection. But you might find that the situation they go to in Africa is more Christian than the place that they were sent from. So that maybe is kind of turning this upside down. So that's a positive thing. It's not all negative, but there is the competition side of it too, that has to be dealt with. And of course, most missionaries should go to Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, etc.
I was going to say, beyond the competition, this is perpetuating the reality of gospel-deprived or unreached people groups.
Right.
I mean, with an estimated, some figures would change, 5,000 unreached people groups today, some nearly 2 billion people who've never heard the name of Jesus in 2020. You know, this is incredible. I often walk into villages in China and say, 你们这儿有没有听说过耶稣基督? Have you ever heard of Jesus Christ here? Mm-hmm. And one man responded to me, 那是不是一种香皂的名牌? Is that a brand of a soap?
Right.
I mean, this is really, he thinks Jesus, he's getting close. Okay, Jesus will wash you up and clean you up a little better than other answers I've received. But nearly 2 billion who've never heard the name of Jesus, this is the fact that we are sending mission trips, or there's gap year missions, or whatever you may call it, going to the easier countries or the easier places or already Christianized. Again, this is what this research is addressing, I think, and challenging the status quo. Will we instead have a theology of suffering that will take us beyond into a risky, precarious situation? I mean, Hudson Taylor said it. Elizabeth Elliot reiterated, I think, without risk, there is no need for faith. Right. And it is a risky undertaking to seek to bring the gospel to places it's not been.
And people, or Christians from all over the world, are taking that risk. That's perhaps the difference. And the challenge is the same for Nigerians or Brazilians or Filipinos or anybody that's sending missionaries out, is to make sure that we encounter people who have not heard the gospel before.
Yes.
And that's an ongoing challenge that we continue to try to measure and publish, and this book is no exception to that.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to kind of wind things down. And before we do, I always love this quote by David Platt. He said, "Don't try to manifest a heart or mind for missions that's devoid of relational intimacy." I think that relational intimacy includes our intimacy with Christ. Obviously, when you know the heart of God and you sense that pulsation within your heart, it is hard not to follow him to the nations or to the people that he loves. And that relational intimacy also is human interaction and connection. I so appreciate you being so graceful in your explanation of things, trends that are taking place in culture, and so appreciate all your efforts in putting together and helping form the 3rd edition of World Christian Encyclopedia. Dr. Todd Johnson, I just so appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing here.
Thank you.
Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join his mission. This podcast is powered by Within Reach Global. Subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube today. Visit missionspulse.com.